We have Lesley with us today. Um, do you want to give a quick intro about yourself, maybe?
Hi, it's nice to meet you all. Wow, it's a great show being here today. And very nice to meet you all. My name is Lesley Carhart, and I am one of the few people on Earth who gets called when like a power plant or a train gets hacked into. I do digital forensics and incident response for OT systems or ICS, SCADA, things like that. And I've been doing that for quite a long time, manufacturing, aviation, etc. I retired from the United States Air Force. I also worked at Motorola for a long time. Right now, I work for a company called Dragos, and Dragos does industrial cybersecurity specifically. So outside of that, I guess I do a lot of stuff in the cybersecurity community. I'm pretty active on almost every social media platform, blogging platform. I'm a commentator on the news, and I teach for SANS. I teach ICS 515, and gosh, I do things. I run a conference. I do career clinics. I guess I just don't sleep. I sleep on the planes. That's what I do.
Not busy and not under pressure. I imagine OTIR, it must be a walk in the park, right?
Oh, I see lots of friends in the chat. Hi, Jeff.
Just to be clear, you are both in the category of Lesley and friends. It's not a separation there. Hi, friends, and also Lesley.
Hi, friends. Hi, all the friends. This is so exciting.
Awesome, awesome. So, I look, I am sure we could talk about hours, if not days, about all kinds of things. But I think, I think you have a pretty unique kind of experience, particularly all the things around the OT. I know I am very curious about, particularly like, the spin I have in mind is like, how do you do IR in OT, and how does that contrast with normal IR and everything within that?
Big difference is people die. People don't normally die when your finance server gets hacked into. I mean, that might be a different case in like health insurance and stuff, but like for the most part, enterprise systems, you're worried about infections, theft of data, tampering with data, things like that, that lend to economic things, financial things. In ICS SCADA, you're worried about sabotage. You're worried about people getting injured, the environment being contaminated, millions of dollars of equipment catching on fire or exploding or being damaged, trains crashing into each other. That is the world I live in. And the big shift of thinking for cybersecurity people getting into this space in any niche of cybersecurity is everything comes down to, is somebody going to die? So it's not, is the domain controller getting on? It's not, is there malware on every box? It's not, oh, is this exploitable? It's like, will somebody die? Will the safety controls be able to prevent it from happening? Is there enough redundancy to prevent it from happening? And you're also dealing with really old stuff and relatively isolated stuff from the rest of the network. So I see Windows NT, Windows XP, Windows 7 on a routine basis, and I have to be able to do forensics on those things. So a lot of my modern whiz-bang tools don't work. There's next to no EDR. And the reason why that stuff is so old is that it is certified to work in one safe way. Like it went through years of testing to function as a unit in one way, and you can't just go swapping out parts and sticking other operating systems in there without rigorous OEM vendor testing and a maintenance outage and approval from the engineers to make sure it's totally safe to do. So old stuff, legacy stuff, no modern tools, and this overarching culture of process safety coming before anything else, making sure that the network functions with good availability and uptime in a reliable way so that nothing bad happens.
I think that's just a huge difference from the IT side, where even if it's not supported by the vendor, yeah, they give it to us with Windows 7, but let's just try installing it on Windows 10 or 11. Hey, it works, good enough, let's swap it out, and we don't have vendor support anymore, where that is a total non-starter on the OT side.
It's challenging. It's challenging, and it's just a big shift in thinking for a lot of cybersecurity people. I find this a lot. Like people get caught up in the, oh, it's got to be hackery, advanced malware, Stuxnet stuff, and it's really much more involved in what can happen to make a really bad consequence happen in this complicated process. So like whether that's canning tuna or oil refining or a train being able to stop and start, those are all those complicated processes that involve a ton of devices, a ton of safety controls, human beings. And you really need to understand more of how those processes can go wrong than how you're going to hack into the computers in them as an individual device.
You kind of mentioned a thing, and I'm curious. So, You mentioned is somebody going to die? And obviously, that is like, that's something that could happen in a lot of those scenarios. Is there a canonical example where like it has actually happened already? Like I know there's like Stuxnet is like the granddaddy of like, those types of attacks, I guess these days, but I'm sure there's more that maybe we even haven't heard about, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The big ones to talk about, of course, are the Ukraine attacks. The first couple major attacks against their power infrastructure were in 2015 and 2016 during that invasion, but they've reamped their cyber efforts as part of this current invasion. Russia has revamped their cyber attacks against physical devices. One of the interesting things there is the two attacks in 2015 and 2016 against power infrastructure. They were definitely against industrial control systems. They were against computers, and that's how they managed to shut off the power there. They weren't terribly effective beyond a few hours because Ukraine had such good resilience and the ability to restore their process with human beings. That's not the case everywhere. They just happened to have that capability to flip over to old school operations and had people who were trained to do that. And they responded very quickly and effectively. So Russia changed their tactics in the newer attacks against Ukraine. So instead of going after their more defended centralized power infrastructure like distribution and transmission, they went after individual blocks of apartment buildings, industrial controllers, to get the heat shut off by tampering with those, to kill the utilities to those apartment buildings so that people would freeze. So yes, this is a very real thing. In terms of people dying, some of it's accidental, some of it's adversaries poking around with things, trying to do espionage and reconnaissance. That's a lot of what they're doing right now, is learning how to test out future attacks. Yes, that's causing damage, injury, death, things like that. And then there's purposeful things going on, usually as part of larger geopolitical conventional war type things. People don't just do this out of the blue. Like, it's very expensive and complicated to launch these attacks in a targeted way. So they are trying to build their capabilities to be able to do them if there's a war, if there's like a political strife between countries, if there is a need to do it from an espionage perspective, et cetera, traditional spycraft. That's why they launched that type of attack on purpose.
Gotcha. And and if we, you talked about some of the differences of between, let's say general purpose IR versus OT. I'm curious if is there also a difference in the process, like, and maybe there isn't like a typical engagement, right? But if I think of like a typical engagement where you're being brought into an OT network, is there a difference in the process? And this is not to say, hey, people should learn to do this, because I don't think you should be playing one on TV. You should actually know what you're doing if you're going to respond to those. But yeah, so I'm curious.
Yeah, so in terms of big differences, thinking is the biggest one that gets people in trouble. I sometimes have to redo other incident response firms' cases because they've blown up an industrial network running their forensics tools. It's horrific. And they've caused more damage than the ransomers or adversaries or whoever was in the network. So yeah, first of all, process and safety consequences first. Like, everything you do, from whether you run something at the command line to how you touch a computer to when you touch a computer. Everything is different in your forensics triage, what systems you gather, when you gather them, and what tools you can run. And that's also true from a legacy and non-standard technology perspective. You have to be able to deal with non-standard cabling, really old stuff. So if you're just learning how to use modern forensics tools, things like modern forensics tools, a lot of that's not going to help you dealing with like Windows NT. So you've got to be able to do manual old school forensics and understand how things like hard drives and memories work at a very fundamental level. So those are kind of like the big differentiators, is being able to deal with a lot of different types of systems, including like embedded devices from a forensics perspective, and then from an incident response perspective, incident handling perspective, being able to make good triage decisions in a life safety situation about what you're touching and when you're touching things, and who you're getting approvals from to do it safely and not cause more damage. There's a lot of different protocols and things too. These are layer cakes of tons of different technologies. Some of them are quite old, some of them are quite complex and novel and specific to vendors. So you have to be very, very flexible and adaptable. You never see the same deployment twice. You never see the same process exactly twice, unless you're coming back into the same facility. So being very flexible, being very adaptable. And my case types, like I kind of divide them into three general categories. The first one is like commodity ransomware stuff, which does impact these environments in sometimes very unexpected and bad ways. And then there's the insider threats, both people who meant to do it and people who were just bored at 3 a.m. and plugged something in because they are stuck in a remote mine in the Arctic Circle or something. And then finally, the third thing is the more advanced sabotage, espionage, usually state or terrorist sponsored activities, which are definitely more prevalent in this space because impacting critical infrastructure is a part of traditional military action and spycraft.
Do you find that, if we look at the general espionage or nation state landscape, right, there's quite a bit of reuse of implants across different engagements, different targets. Do you find that it's the same in OT networks, or they're built purpose built per engagement, pretty much?
It's almost all human based. So it's very hard. Like in enterprise, yeah, you see a lot of the same phishing campaigns, and some attacks into OT environments certainly still come through the enterprise environment down through the DMZ into the OT environment, and those tend to use more traditional spear phishing campaigns, things like that. But once you get into that second stage of the ICS kill chain down into that industrial network, that's almost all human driven now. The adversaries know that modern detection tools can pick up scamming and hacking tools and exploitation, things like that. A lot of what they're doing, because it's all that's necessary and it's hard to detect, is getting somebody's credentials. There's less security maturity in these environments and just using somebody's authorized administrator accounts and not getting detected. And as I mentioned, a lot of what they're doing right now is reconnaissance. So they're just taking screenshots, taking pictures of screens, learning how things are configured, what safety controls are in place, stealing logic files off of devices so that in the future, they can launch an attack that does something very specific very quickly in those environments. So it's kind of scary. It's like you have to think a lot more about traditional threat hunting and threat intelligence in the space because you don't have like that luxury of EDR in a lot of those systems. And more importantly, things like EDR aren't necessarily going to detect those types of living off the land and account abuse problems that we're dealing with in these scenarios. They are not going to build custom Stuxnet to attack something when they can just log on to an HMI workstation and click buttons and do what they want to do.
So that's fascinating. So does that mean then that the era of the Stuxnet attack that were, I mean, there was the inception of it was human based, but the implant, had a lot of technology packed into it. Does that mean that that era is kind of past, or I wonder how we should think about this? Is it that it lags behind, the general security? Do you have thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because of the age of the systems, a lot of them won't even support modern EDR. And again, they have these long testing life cycles. That's what I want you to think about. I think that's something people miss a lot. It's not even just having to wait for a maintenance outage to update things and the cost of updating things. Like from a vendor warranty perspective and also from a safety perspective, before you make a change to these systems, they have to go through rigorous testing, like not just like the kind of build testing you do in enterprise, like multiple layers of safety testing to make sure these will function long term with whatever change you've done to Windows or to the firmware, to the logic on them, etc. So it's a very long life cycle to get new systems deployed and to make substantial changes to them, like operating system updates. So they have to be approved by the vendor. You might lose your warranty. You might create an unsafe situation. So these environments at a higher level, the Windows, Linux level, stay fairly vulnerable. And then at the lower level, PLCs, these ruggedized computers that are doing the actual control stuff, they're really simple. I see a lot of like pen testers and bug bounty hunters. They get like a PLC or they find one and show it and they're like, I can exploit this. And I'm like, yeah, man, like I can exploit it and I don't do this for a living. Like you send it a stop command, it stops. It's the big red button on the wall. Like You tell the device to do something, and if you know how the protocol basically functions, you can tell it to do something. Like, they're real simple. They're really vulnerable devices by design because they have to be simple. You can't add layers of encryption to that. It's yet another thing that could fail and kill somebody. So I call it, like, my personal name for this is the M&M model. It's the crispy candy outside around the very gooey candy center. Like, you try to build enclaves, you try to build in good segmentation, good DMZs, strong remote access connection controls, and you try to make these bastions of these really vulnerable things, old things, lower level things, and that's kind of the tactic there. And that impacts how you do all types of cybersecurity and OT.
And I guess I mean, it makes sense too if you think about it from the attacker's perspective, right? Like this trend that you're saying of less technological attack and more human attack, because as an attacker, I mean, even for a nation state, right? If I'm going to go and attack a specific, water treatment facility, I also need to gain access to that device that I can run within my country, that I can build testing against to make sure my attack's going to work. And that's a ton of time, energy, compared to just like screenshot and like hit the stop button, like you're saying, right?
These effective attacks, like Stuxnet and crash override that we're talking about, were exactly as complicated and technical as they needed to be. Why did Stuxnet need this huge, complicated malware framework, this really complicated, long development time? Well, because we were talking about uranium enrichment in an actually air-gapped, incredibly secure environment. There is no network transmission in and out of it. So you had to have a way to impact the devices inside a physically and digitally isolated environment in a hostile nation without having any interaction with it. So you had to be able to launch an attack by getting something little in there and having it do a very, very specific targeted things to the industrial devices. That's why it had to be so complicated. For the most part, modern industrial systems, even like the ones in Ukraine, are not so isolated. Everything's connected now. Everything's connected to the enterprise network through a DMZ pretty much. There's next to no real air gapping. We're getting more and more connected because vendors love to remotely service things. So they are demanding remote access. They're the ones demanding remote access for the most part, the people who service the equipment. And they won't keep your warranty going if you don't allow them some kind of remote access. And there's usually multiple vendors and they all want remote access. So as we want more connectivity and telemetry from these environments, there's more and more stuff connected, which means adversaries don't need to build some crazy malware toolkit that operates entirely in an insular way by itself. You can just get access to the environment and poke at things, and there's way less chance of detection there. So it costs less, it's easier to do, and it's harder to detect by the defenders. So yeah, we see more of that for logical reasons. Will that potentially change as we get more mature in these environments? Maybe. Attackers will always do exactly the minimum that they need to do to launch a successful attack and not get detected.
And that's a kind of a great segue into the other side of that equation. I think you kind of touched a lot on the IR side. Do you also work on the prevention slash ongoing monitoring side of things? Is that different? Is that getting better?
The space is maturing. People are really trying. I mean, there's some regulation across the world. There's a lot of countries that are requiring some security, some cybersecurity controls in their critical infrastructure now in various verticals more than others. We see that like in electric, in oil and gas in the United States now, and other countries are following suit. And that impacts the maturity of organizations, but just stories in the news and people being more cognizant of OT cybersecurity threats as they get more prevalent, as adversaries latch onto them and the barrier to entry gets lower. People are more cognizant and they're trying to do better at defense. Different verticals are at different maturity levels, different size organizations. It depends on their budget. I see a little bit of everything. A lot of what I do when I start onboarding new retainer customers is understand where I need to meet them and how I can help them. Sometimes it's providing very advanced forensic services for low-level devices, and sometimes it's guiding them through everything because they have nothing in place. So things are generally headed the right direction. We're getting more calls, which is good. People are actually noticing they're getting hacked. That's a good thing. Yeah, definitely. But they're way behind enterprise in a lot of traditional cybersecurity measures and controls. And so we have a long way to go, and adversaries are certainly moving in that direction too, because Obviously, physical impacts are newsworthy. They draw attention. There's like triple extortion potential there. It's viable for criminal actors, and states are making it a part of their typical toolkit for doing military grade sabotage.
You just said triple extortion. This is something I've never heard about before. Please tell me more.
Yo, so like ransomware, you have double extortion. Maybe I coined that term. I coin terms sometimes, and then I think everybody knows them. I'm sorry. Uh, so like your first layer of extortion during ransomware is your computer getting encrypted and you can't access your files. But people have started getting more mature in defense, and they've started doing better backups, and now they can sometimes recover from that without paying the ransom. So ransomware is like, again, making the most money as quickly and efficiently as possible, trying to accomplish the goal with the least effort possible. They're like, what if we also steal some stuff that looks embarrassing and we stick it on the internet, on our websites, on the dark web, whatever, and we say, hey, we hacked these people. If you don't pay up, we're going to tell everybody we hacked you. So that's double extortion. That's the thing that's going on extensively right now. So what I'm talking about in like a triple extortion is like you do all those things, and if they still don't pay up, well, you've got a situation now where you can make people's lives miserable by, not necessarily being an expert at like crash override, Stuxnet, Traces type stuff, but like, even if you just send a bunch of stop commands to devices, you don't know what it's going to do, but it's going to make people's lives miserable, blowing away their logic, killing their HMIs, things like that. You can do a lot of disruptive, low-tech things, and people are starting to build toolkits to do that type of stuff with common deployments in industrial. So obviously, criminal actors are thinking about that. Like maybe it's not like, oh my God, we're going to turn power off or turn all the traffic lights green, but like we don't have the expertise to do that. But if we disrupt all the PLCs so they can't do their job, that's a big pain, and we can potentially even leverage beyond those two original layers of extortion to get people to pay up.
Gotcha, gotcha. Oh, that's good. I like it. I like that term. uh, do you do you have thoughts, or like what's the thing that you think would have the most impact going forward on helping? Like, is it compliance framework, like the trusted but boring, side of things, like government enforcement? Is it technological? Is it?
I think it's human. I think that's a common answer from us old curmudgeonly cybersecurity people. There's a lot of misconceptions and misunderstandings about industrial space in the general cybersecurity community. We've been doing cybersecurity wrong in that space for a long time, to the point where there's hostile relationships between the people who work on that equipment and the cybersecurity personnel at a lot of organizations. We've had to be escorted in by the police before because people hate each other that much. So if you, and you probably do have industrial stuff in your environment, even if it's just backnet things like air conditioners, data center backup generators, things like that. They're doing vital stuff. Even the control for your building elevators, that's all industrial equipment, and it does important things that impact your business. Losing your air conditioners on your data center is a really big deal, especially if it's toasty like it is for you guys right now. So think about that equipment, think about where it exists, and then start trying to build human relationships with the people who manage it. And don't assume that you know more about that equipment than they do. They are the electrical engineers, chemical engineers, things like that. You've got to be patient. You've got to job shadow. You've got to really understand what the real consequences that can happen in that environment are, and then start having conversations about how you can help them keep their equipment up and running. You can keep it reliable, you can keep it safe. That's what they care about. So you've got to have a common dictionary of terms, you've got to have good relationships, you've got to be patient and rebuild those relationships. And that's how you start on these programs, because all your assumptions about those environments are wrong. Your assumptions about the remote access to them and the age of the patches on those systems is wrong. Your assumptions about the quality of your asset inventory and your network maps is wrong. You need to go validate all that stuff. That has to be, you have to see it with your own eyes. Don't trust any of your documentation right now. Go start building good human relationships, and then start validating where you really are and doing the foundations.
I was under the impression, I think it was RSA a few years back, you had a wonderful quote on, you can pay Lesley uh, to do your hardware inventory, to do your software inventory, to build out the map of how things are connected. But it's a really expensive way to do
I'm
so.
expensive, guys. Like, no, If the money doesn't go directly to me, but like incident response hours, like in a crisis, when you're worried about people dying, that is not the time to have your incident response consultants build you a new network map and a new asset inventory, because we need that stuff to do forensics, to do analysis. Please do it now. Please don't trust that your documentation from 10 years ago is still right. There is more remote access now. People usually tell me, they tell me things. They're like so sure about things. They're like, it's air gapped, and it's not air gapped. And then they're like, oh, there's only one remote access route in. And then I find 9 on computers from the different vendors and OEMs over the years, and they've never been removed. Like, it's all wrong. All your documentation, all your assumptions about those environments are wrong. You probably have poor relationships with the people who work there. It's all going to cause you issues in incident response, and it's going to be really expensive for me to come fix those on hours I should be doing forensics with. So just my warning, I'm a terrible salesperson. Spend less money, prepare in advance, understand your OT environment.
Plus, it lets you do more interesting things than building out one more network diagram. You had some other anecdote on the average number of remote access methods you find, and some percentage of them being completely undocumented. Can you share that particular anecdote? It was like 4, 5, 6, 7, something
Yeah, a
like that.
bunch of people asking about the warranties and the remote access and what the real state of that is in the Q&A right now. And like, the vendors are king. The OEMs are king in these environments. It's like buying an IBM system in the 1980s. Like, you buy a stack of technology from a vendor, probably multiple vendors that tie together to do telemetry, to do monitoring, to do the management of the actual equipment and the process, to do the safety controlling. It's all like certified, warranty to work together as a package, tested for probably months ahead of time. So you have the OEMs that design this stuff, make sure it works safely, and you rely on them to do maintenance and repairs of the system. You rely heavily for maybe decades on that warranty contract with that vendor. And what they say goes in a lot of cases. Like, there's usually not a lot of security involved in those contracts, and there's limitations to what security can negotiate there. So they are going to demand things like only allowing certain updates that they vet. They are going to require, usually post-COVID, some type of remote access to be able to do remote administration. And that could be true of multiple vendors in your environment. And sometimes those access mechanisms change because they use subcontractors who want different stuff. Sometimes they change over time and the old mechanisms aren't removed. So the OEMs do a lot of like shadow IT in these environments that is essential to maintain a support contract for multi-million-dollar equipment. And it might not all be documented with your side of things in your remote access policies, your VPN concentrator, your account management, et cetera. So again, don't assume anything. Go look at the computers when you can, when the engineers are able to allow you to look at your network layout, look at your computer configuration, look at what's installed on those computers yourself.
You know, I gotta say, I really like kind of the poetry of saying, us software people have things to learn, or I think we make assumptions because we are always in software land about how things work, and vice versa, right? Engineers think in terms of chips on a board and the cost of that chip, and never. I know we talk often to people that come from that world, and when you start talking about like, hey, we need this security measure, and it's X dollars per month, it just blows their mind, because for them, they count quarters of a penny on the board, and it's just crazy. So I think there's a lot to kind of bridge that gap between all of us. Thank you so much for coming in. That was super interesting. Yeah, if people want to keep chatting, or how can they reach you, or if they reach you, or any parting words?
I'm happy to talk to you. I am in the process of moving internationally right now, so my responses might be a little slow or really fast if I'm stuck on a really long flight. You can reach me on almost every social media except for X as Hacks for Pancakes, the number 4, Hacks for Pancakes. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Mastodon, Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, Reddit, whatever you want to use to reach me. I also have a blog, and that's linked on those as well. And yeah, I'm pretty communicative. I'm happy to help you as I can. Reach out.
Awesome. Thanks again. And thanks everybody for joining us. If you want to keep some of that discussion, we also have community.limacharlie.io if you want to reach us there as well. See you, everybody.